Senator from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise today in opposition of Linda McMahon's nomination to serve as the Secretary of the Department of Education. You know, all across America, from small towns like Grand Marais to cities like Grand Rapids, public schools serve as the bedrock of our communities. As a product of Michigan public schools, the son of a public school teacher, and having watched my own 3 children attend public schools, I know firsthand the importance of public education. Education is the cornerstone of academic achievement, career development, and lifelong learning in our society. A strong public education system is critical to not only our nation's economy, but community safety, social mobility, and the health of our democracy. We need a Secretary of Education who values and respects public education and the millions of teachers and faculty who support the system. We need a Secretary of Education who will support critical funding streams like Head Start for early education, IDEA for students with disabilities, and the school meal program that ensures that no student goes to class hungry. That is why we cannot allow Mrs. McMahon to run our Department of Education. Instead of working to protect funding for the programs that support our students, improve classrooms, and help recruit the hardworking teachers that we so desperately need today, Mrs. McMahon has made it clear that she has, well, other priorities. During her committee hearing, she blatantly supported efforts to dismantle our education system, including taking funding away from our public schools and using it to make investments in private schools. Mrs. McMahon and others have tried to sell this as, quote, school choice, but we know that it is basically a voucher program that will ultimately give private schools the ability to handpick students and close their doors to everyone else. Private schools have no requirement to serve students with disabilities, students with mental health needs, or homeless students. We've already seen private school voucher programs fail in states that have actually implemented them, like Louisiana, where students who accepted vouchers experienced significant declines in their academic performance, worse than learning loss caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and Hurricane Katrina. So-called school choice does not meet the needs of our students, and American voters overwhelmingly agree. A 2024 poll found that less than a quarter of Americans support increased funding for school vouchers. Meanwhile, 68% of Americans want to boost public school funding to better support teachers and give our students and children the education and career opportunities that they certainly deserve. Under Mrs. McMahon's plan, we would be letting private schools decide who is educated and who is not. But unfortunately, we know that these private institutions will always prioritize their bottom line, and the needs of students and families will be second. If confirmed as Secretary of Education, the quality of our American education will certainly decline, and our children will ultimately suffer the consequences. I would urge my colleagues to vote no on Mrs. McMahon's nomination.
From California is recognized.
Mr. President, over the last few months, there's literally been more than 10,000 Californians that have made it a point to reach out to me by phone calls, by letters, by emails, to say one thing loud and clear. Stand up for public education. There's students throughout California, teachers throughout California, and parents throughout California, I'm sure beyond, in all of our states, that are afraid that Donald Trump is going to decimate federal funding for public schools. And from what we've seen, they have every right to be concerned. See, only 1 month into office, the richest president in our history has teamed up with the richest man in the world to slash public funding across the board, including in education. They've already terminated nearly $1 billion in contracts with the education department alone. They've fired or placed on leave education department staff. These are hard-working Americans dedicated to everything from protecting the civil rights of students to special education to student aid. And they're making it clear that this is just the beginning. President Trump has bragged that he actually wants to eliminate the Department of Education, threatening the quality of education of 80% of students who go to public schools. Colleagues, that's the situation. That is the context in which we find ourselves today as we consider the nomination of Linda McMahon to serve as Education Secretary. So we could talk about Linda McMahon's qualifications or frankly, lack thereof, but I'm not shocked because President Trump isn't looking for someone with the background or the commitment to strengthen education in America. He's looking for someone to destroy it. President Trump has said publicly that he wishes that Ms. McMahon would, quote, put herself out of a job. And it's clear that she's ready to do it. And to justify it, I know I've heard countless accusations of Department of Education overreach or that the department is just too big. Now, if we're saying this because of the budget cuts Republicans are starving for to underwrite the tax breaks for the wealthy, let me remind us all that the Department of Education is the smallest agency in the cabinet by a lot. The department is responsible, though, for promoting equal access to education, ensuring protections and support for students with special needs, defending the civil rights of tens of millions of students, and yes, managing the student loans and Pell Grants that students need to afford an education, just like I did when I was graduating from San Fernando High School, trying to figure out how I was going to be able to pay for college. Yet Linda McMahon and Republicans in Congress will try to sell us on the idea that education should be left to states and to local communities. Tell that to the young student who's struggling to read by the 4th grade, but whose schools don't have the resources they need to help them catch up. Tell that to the parents of an 8th grader who's behind in math, who fear that their child will never be able to make up the time that they lost during the pandemic. Now, while it's true that state and local communities play the primary role in education, it's actually the federal government that helps close the gaps. That's part of what makes our country strong, the idea that no matter where you live, no matter who your parents are or what tax bracket your family is in, you have the right to a good education. Because after all, it's the surest path to achieving your American dream. And yes, it's personal for me. As I mentioned, I'm a proud product of public education, a graduate of San Fernando High School. Go Tigers. And upon completion of my high school education, I was accepted, had the blessed opportunity to attend the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where I earned my degree in mechanical engineering. And that led to a better life and more opportunities. Exactly what my parents worked so hard and sacrificed for. That's the American dream. And I know that by far I'm not alone. But that's why I find it outrageous that Mr. McMahon and Republicans can so callously plan to take a chainsaw to the American dreams of so many current and future students. But today, we're here to say that tens of millions of public school students are not line items on your chopping block. They deserve better. Our country is better than this. And I urge all my colleagues to reject President Trump's attempts to abolish the Department of Education and to reject Linda McMahon's nomination or any nominee who's willing to carry out his wishes. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
The senator from Hawaii is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise today deeply concerned about the state of public education in our country. Public education is foundational. It allows people to get ahead. As simple as that. It's foundational. I've spoken before on the floor about the power of public education in my own life. As an immigrant from Japan, I arrived in this country speaking no English. I started off by trying to learn how to count from 1 to 10. Very humble beginnings. But it was the public education I received at schools like Kokohead Elementary and Kamiki High School that enabled me, an immigrant from very humble beginnings, to learn English and to go on to college, law school, and ultimately the U.S. Senate. We should all agree on the importance of a strong public education system for every student in our country. An educated citizenry helps grow the middle class and drive economic success in red and blue states alike. Support for public schools should not be a partisan issue. There are millions of kids who are attending public schools in every single state in our country. So it shouldn't be a partisan issue. But just weeks into the Trump administration, public education is under attack. Already, chainsaw-wielding Elon Musk. It's really hard to get rid of that image because he takes such delight in wielding that chainsaw and willy-nilly cutting all kinds of government programs that we rely on. But Elon Musk and his minions have started unilaterally canceling contracts at the Department of Education without any transparency or accountability whatsoever. And Donald Trump has made no secret of his desire to eliminate the Department of Education entirely. As part of his quest to cut government services we rely on to give trillions in handouts to his billionaire buddies. While only Congress has the power to eliminate the Department of Education in its entirety, that is not stopping Trump from using every means available to weaken federal support for education. And as you heard from my colleague just previously, there is a lot of support for public education in our country. Why? Because most of the people in our country have to go to public schools. A person who will help him do this, meaning totally weaken our public school system and eliminate the Department of Education, is billionaire Linda McMahon. As Trump's Secretary of Education, she will dismantle the Department of Education from the inside out. President Trump told her that he wants her to, quote, put herself out of a job by eliminating this department. Since President Trump only nominates people who are 100% loyal to him, we can expect Linda McMahon will comply with putting herself out of a job, which leads us to wonder why we are even giving her this job in the first place. A nominee tasked to end the very department that she is supposed to be leading does not need to have much by way of experience in leading or running such a department, which is the case with Linda McMahon. In her confirmation hearing, Mrs. McMahon could not name a single requirement of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the main federal law that supports K-12 education. She couldn't say whether teaching African American history courses violated Trump's executive order on radical indoctrination. Teaching the history of our country is considered radical indoctrination by this president. Think about that for a minute. She couldn't even answer a simple yes or no question about whether schools receiving taxpayer dollars should be allowed to discriminate against children with disabilities. Mrs. McMahon is totally unqualified to oversee the education of our nation's children. But Donald Trump doesn't care about that. Linda McMahon will carry out President Trump's dangerous agenda to dismantle the Department of Education, privatize the nation's public schools, and strip educational opportunities from millions of students across the country. In doing so, she will be 100% loyal to Donald Trump above all else. She'll execute the plans laid out in Project 2025 to eliminate funding for Title I schools, which supports low-income students. We are talking about funding for 49,000 Title I schools throughout the country, including 170 schools in my state of Hawaii, 2,900 Title I schools in Florida, 7,500 Title I schools in Texas, and so many more. Every single state has Title I schools, 49,000 Title I schools throughout our country. Project 2025, Trump's blueprint, will have the Secretary of Education dismantle civil rights protections for students and weaponize the Office of Civil Rights to advance Trump's hateful, far-right political agenda. Then, the Secretary will come after funding for programs that help provide child care, after-school care, school meals, and more. Think about it, school meals. For many children, that would mean taking away access to the only meal a day they can count on. Why? Not because she thinks these decisions will improve outcomes or benefit students. No, these attacks on the Department of Education are about one thing, and one thing only: finding money to pay for massive giveaways to billionaires like McMahon, Elon Musk, obviously the president, and their ilk. Republicans are robbing our children's futures to line the pockets of their billionaire buddies. And they're robbing our country of future doctors, innovators, leaders, and more. Mr. President, a strong public education system is the foundation of a strong democracy, a strong economy, and a strong middle class. That's why Democrats are committed to strengthening our schools and ensuring every child has the opportunity to get ahead regardless of disability, income, or background. That starts with our rejecting Linda McMahon's troubling nomination to lead the Department of Education, a department that she is going to start dismantling and indeed working herself out of a job. On behalf of students, teachers, and families in Hawaii and all across our country, I urge my colleagues to think about it, to oppose this nomination. I yield back.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise today to speak on the importance of the Department of Education and my grave concerns about the nomination of Linda McMahon to be the Secretary of Education. Now, President Trump has made it clear what his directive is for Linda McMahon. It's to dismantle the Department of Education. And despite President Trump stating that he has never read Project 2025, and Mrs. McMahon repeatedly stating that she's not familiar with Project 2025's proposals on higher education, it is abundantly clear that this administration is following Project 2025 to a T. Project 2025 lays out a blueprint for ending the federal government's role in public education, starting with dismantling the Department of Education so that they can find the money they need to provide tax breaks for their billionaire friends. You heard me right. Cutting public education dollars so that the richest can get richer. Eliminating the Department of Education would be absolutely devastating for students, for teachers and parents in Wisconsin and across America. Wisconsin stands to have $235 million in Title I funding ripped away. Wisconsin stands to have over $270 million in IDEA funding, which is critical for special education, ripped away. What this means is Wisconsin teachers stand to have needed resources for their classrooms ripped away. Parents stand to have their in and out of classroom support for their children ripped away. And of course, our children stand to lose out on the public education and opportunity to learn that they deserve, regardless of their zip code. Look, we know we are facing a challenging time in the American education system. We know that as a nation, we must turn the tide and ensure that America is a global leader in educating our children. And I'm committed to working with parents, teachers, principals, and school districts to do just that. But we also know what won't help our children get a good education, and that's slashing the education budget. And we know what will help turn the tide: critical, data-driven investments in our public education system to support our children, our teachers, our schools, and our communities. It is clear that Mrs. McMahon is being nominated for this role, not to help children, but to do Mr. Trump's bidding. She comes to this role with very little experience in education, but she has a wealth of experience in Trump world. She's never been a teacher, but she did donate over $20 million to Trump's campaign and organizations that are backing him. She's never been a school administrator, but she does sit on the board of directors for Trump Media and Technology Group. In this critical time, we need to be providing our students and schools with more support, not less. And I urge my colleagues to join me in voting no on her nomination. And I yield the floor.